Okay, we're now back from our break. Hope you enjoyed it. Welcome back to the next part of the presentation. Our next presenter is Dr. John Bosco Conama. He has a PhD, the first in Ireland to do so, and is the assistant professor within Trinity College Dublin. John Bosco, welcome. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to share my PowerPoint, just a moment. So thank you for your patience again. I have mentioned the title and quote unquote saying deaf because we still don't know whether or not he is, but there's elements that I will be speaking to, bearing in mind that I work at TCD, where I've been asked who is the person that's got the first degree. Was it me or was it somebody else? So I'm going to very quickly introduce James David BOURCHIER, and I'm going to do it for JS for short. So very quickly, there are two quote unquote deaf people in Trinity. To the left, the gentleman with the glasses. He was Church of Ireland, a clergyman, early deafened, and Rachel Pollard has already written about him in a book. He was a sign language, he used sign language, and this is stated by Henry Pollard, who was able to confirm that. He graduated with a BA and MA from TCD. So is he the first deaf person? We have yet to know that. We know about the women, but bearing in mind in Ireland, women were not allowed to attend university or complete their education. So they were discriminated in that sense. So is there somebody prior to our reverend here? We don't know. Now to the right with the ear trumpet, which is a fantastic photograph, is a staff member. Higher up, I think quite possibly would have been hard of hearing. So if you look at the word here, Gwyn, Gwynn, is a family from Scotland, strongly involved with TCD, strongly involved with the independence from the UK, even though came from the Church of Ireland. So became deafened, and through the lockdown and walking within the 2-kilometer restrictions, I had the opportunity of finding out about him, and his grave is over in the White Graveyard, a beautiful monument in its place. So those are two that I have found, but I have not completed my research, but just look at the titles that they have had. Very impressive. The next slide is James himself. You can see, was he cold or was it just a natural face position that he had? But here we are, quote unquote, deaf, because it is open to interpretation. It is up to you to decide, but he had graduated, he was a teacher, a journalist, a political activist, a mediator, amongst others. Now, I have not looked at all of his achievements as yet, but I want those who wrote about James and look at what it is that they have had to say about him. And the issue of him and his deafness, a lot of it negative connotations plus positive. But regardless, he was still an achiever of many things. The next slide, please. So what I tried to do was structure this presentation about who is James? Is he deaf? It's a famous question worldwide. As Noel said, people who say, are we the same? Are we different? Do we have a sense of belonging? All of that. So what I want to do is talk about other people's perceptions of him. What is it that they had thought of James? And then at the end, I will give you my point of view, and I hope you're going to enjoy it. Next slide, please. So have a look at the photographs for a moment. He was well known in Bulgaria. There's two different name signs for Bulgaria. Well known there. He was considered a hero, but in Ireland he is unknown. Who is this man? But he was well known. He was born in County Limerick, but moved to County Kilkenny. And he said Kilkenny was his home. He never said Limerick. But Limerick have done a lot about him. So this is interesting. He graduated in 1873. He achieved a gold medal. So if you're in the top of your class, you pass everything, you pass all of your exams, assessments, you are honored with a gold medal. This is what he achieved in TCD. He went to Cambridge in England and achieved high status there and became an Eton College, which is a very rich private university. So high echelons, worked there for 10 years. As time progressed, he went to the Times newspaper in England and was a journalist. So if you look at Romania, Greece, and Albania, all of those places, he wrote about that. He became a mediator as a journalist and deaf. Wow, really? Okay, a mediator. And the higher up in government and royalty would have private dialogues with them. That shows confidence in him. And he was clearly a trusted person. Now, he died in Sofia in 1920 with a very large state funeral. So this is a funeral organized by government. It was massive based on this person. So this is an Irish person, and yet who is say? Now, why am I looking at him? Because he is ex-TCD, he's graduated. Now, others, you yourself will have graduated, but the fact that he was deaf was of interest to me. Now, in Bulgaria, there are streets, mountains, sea coves, stamps, all dedicated to him. Can you see it in the bottom right? There is a place that is named after him. Like, how impressive is that? His life was serious, but again, I was only interested in the perceptions of others, of what others have had to say about him. Okay? So next slide, please. So here you can see a stamp. I wonder how many deaf people have been stamped for their country. Now we've got an old stamp and a new stamp, and Bulgaria still remember and honor him through a stamp. There's also an old newspaper clipping that talks about the state funeral. So serious. Now, has he been forgotten? Has been ignored? Now, there is some memory of him. And for example, today he will be remembered, and hope you find his life of interest. So next slide, please. So let's have a look at the video. Click on the video, please. So the famous question, are you deaf? And when I was reading up on him, it's like, was he really deaf? Now, many things have been written about him and said that he was Irish, he was partially deaf, did not marry. He was educated in Enniskillen and TCD. Now, he would have become a lawyer, but because of his hearing loss as a result of cold and the measles. Now, who said that? That it was actually written about him. And then here we have O'Brien. There is a book about his life. And in reading it, it says that he had a hearing loss from childhood, Really, I thought it was when he was older, but others have said he became deaf at the age of 26. So we don't know which story it is to be believed. And also, in the biography online that you will see on this presentation, he was, despite his deafness, he was a charming conversationalist, a linguist, and a musician. So would you not push him ahead in the category of hard of hearing? But others have said he is successful, but still talk about his deafness. And isn't that interesting? Now, for me, I think he would be classified as hard of hearing, but later in life became deafened. And we'll see that as it progresses through the slides. So recently in 1996, the London newspaper called The Times, there is a quote here that says, oh, he was a very private man, nervous, haunted by his growing deafness, maybe homosexual, but he was a close confidant of kings and ambassadors and involved in their intrigues. That is an impressive statement. Very interesting. The words, haunted by his growing deafness. Look at the wording. How interesting. Now, he himself wrote a lot, but when he died, it was put to fire. We don't know if that was of his wishes or because, remember that he had contact with with contacts in the Balkans. So what he had must have been quite impressive. The next slide. Have a quick look. So this is a bit of background. And in the background picture, you will see Eton College. So when you say public school in England, it actually means private. And here we have Foley saying, oh, he, because of his increasing deafness, could not become a lawyer, but decided to become a teacher, but he was not happy. But often would go to Sofia, go to the palace to meet with the king. And when the Balkans became independent, himself and the king would have their own conversation through the ear trumpet, whereby other people could hear very sensitive information between those two. Isn't that interesting? And again, he was saying, despite, look at the word despite, he was still friendly and made contacts easily. Now, in looking at that, is it because he was deaf or because of his strength of his personality that he was able to approach people? That we don't know.
In the Irish Times article of 2008, it states the person became a hero in Bulgaria. It mentions the word deaf included in this, which is an interesting point. Became a lawyer, but as a result of that, because of the cold, measles. Again, look at the label of being deaf. He was promoted as a teacher, but unfortunately stayed in the same position for 10 years. So look at the views. Very, very interesting. They kept on looking to his deafness. While it could have been the system that discriminated him. Is that okay? We'll now move on to the next screen. With all of the articles that were of a negative connotation, I finally found a positive deaf gain. So if we look at this, a staunch advocate of independence for nationalities under the Turkish rule and of a Balkan federation. He won by his honesty, and his disinterestedness of the trust and affection of peasants and peasants alike. He was often entrusted with the role of intermediary by the region's warring factions. His deafness generally proven more of an asset than a handicap. So this is a positive, a deaf gain. Is it? Is it not? I myself don't know who he was as a character. Other books that have been published on him that spoke of him, they don't know who he was. He just continued to be a diplomat and continued his negotiation. So this particular quote is very interesting. Moving on to the next slide. The person, Martin O'Brien. So this was an interview in Limerick, the local history in Limerick. So there was voice recognition and there were errors when I was watching the subtitles. So I don't want to twist any of the information. So this was an interview by Limerick Radio on YouTube, but they did go there. Then he went to Trinity and that he went to Cambridge and he got a job teaching in Eden. Then as the interview went on, it stated that he knew that he would have to give up being a teacher because of his deafness. Another interesting point. Was it due to lack of access? Did he admit it himself? I am unsure of this, I don't know. So again, another interesting point. This was voice recognition of his interview, but you can see the link down at the bottom right-hand corner. I think the interview consisted of an hour and a half interview. Okay, to the next one. Another interesting book, The Grandmother and the Wolf and Wolf Tone. A very well-known leader in the 1798 rebellion. Written by Hubert Butler from Kilkenny. He had met with James as an older man. And he stated that he was so deaf, hunched over, couldn't communicate. This was 1919, a year prior to his death. In it, he wrote that he was a bad teacher. Another interesting point. Even though he was very deaf, he was unable to manage the class, to discipline the class. One evening, as he was teaching, all of the boys decided to turn off the lights. He couldn't figure out what it was. The boys lit a fire and escaped and just was not able to manage it. So over a 10-year period became more deaf and as a result of that was fired, unable to do his job. So it's just interesting to see these different perspectives and at the same time constantly being accused as a result of his deafness. The author here said that James, as a deaf person, was discriminated as a result of being handicapped. That was the language of the time. Yet he was a man of tenacity. And I think, hello, if I was to read this, these are the views, and yet look at the skills that deaf people have in terms of using the phone, again, asking the porter to make calls on his behalf. There was written communication, there was private negotiations, spoke very well, while despite being unable to hear. But so it's interesting how he is perceived in this particular, by this particular author. On to the next point. James, I'm sure you agree, he achieved a lot of success. I think it is more likely that I would label him as hard of hearing. However, he had a very interesting life. Again, I am unsure of whether to label him deaf, hard of hearing, sign language user. It would seem that it was more like that he was hard of hearing. I would like to investigate and research other people who have written about him and to see how he was perceived. Despite all of his achievements, they spoke to his deafness. It seems to be of a negative connotation. It's an experience that I have experienced myself, as I'm sure many of you have. First point of contact, the perception is of me as a deaf person, a perception of those of us who are of a different race, color, creed, which is always interesting. I admire him when we think back to the 1900s. He didn't fly, however, he took the boat to the Balkans, negotiated in other languages, was able to communicate in Bulgarian, Greek, other languages, and he was trusted with these negotiations. Very, very successful because of these peaceful negotiations. He was well respected. We can see the newer stamp that is now in existence. There is a woman here who has a deaf lady by the name of Sofia Kalanova, currently studying here in Ireland as a barrister. When I had a conversation with her with regard to this person, they had said that the street is well known, he's a very well-known name over there. However, the point of interest for her was that she was not aware of his deafness. So within Bulgaria, he is very well known. I continue my research into this interesting character. Very conflicting views on him as a child and whatnot. So there are still deliberations on this. However, I will continue to look at him from his time in TCD and to look at, was he deaf, or as a result of his illness became deaf? And this is a point that is once again interesting about him, is the belief in countries being independent, such as Turkish rule, just as we have it here in Ireland. It says much, but what was interesting is the evictions. The landlord evicting people, and so lots have been written on that in Ireland, that it was wrong. So internally, there may have been a sense that that's what was wanted, but may not have been stated so clearly. Okay, so that concludes my presentation for now. Thank you very much.